The funeral director had just invited people to share their memories when my brother Mike stood up and adjusted his expensive suit jacket. I watched him walk to the podium with that familiar swagger he'd perfected over years of closing real estate deals. My 7-year-old son Tommy lay in a small white casket covered with superhero stickers he'd picked out himself 2 weeks before he died, knowing exactly what was coming. "Tommy was a special boy," Mike began, his voice carrying that fake sympathy tone he used with clients. "But sometimes God takes children early for a reason. Given our family's history of struggles, maybe this is God's way of ending bad bloodlines." The words hit me like ice water. I felt my father Dennis grip the pew so hard his knuckles went white, but the worst part was watching several relatives actually nod in agreement. My cousin Janet whispered, "He has a point," to her husband. My Aunt Ruth dabbed her eyes and patted Mike's shoulder as he returned to his seat, like he'd just delivered some profound wisdom instead of calling my dead child a genetic mistake. Before I could even process what had just happened, my sister Vera stood up. She smoothed her black designer dress, the one she'd probably bought specifically for this occasion, and walked to the front with her chin held high. What Mike said might sound harsh, but there's truth in it. Some kids are better off not growing up in broken homes. Tommy suffered so much, not just from the cancer, but from the circumstances. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise for Nadine, too. Now she can start fresh, find a husband, have a proper family this time. A proper family. As if Tommy and I weren't a real family. As if my son's 2-year battle with leukemia was somehow less valid because his father had left when Tommy was 2. The funeral director looked uncomfortable, shifting near the side door like he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. That's when I heard a small voice from the 3rd row. "Should I tell everyone what Uncle Mike did to Tommy before he died?" Every head in the funeral home turned to look at Colin, Tommy's 8-year-old best friend. He stood there in his little black suit, the one his mother had probably scrambled to buy yesterday. His hands were shaking, but his voice was clear. This tiny boy with freckles across his nose and a missing front tooth was standing up in front of 100 adults with more courage than I'd ever seen. Mike's face went from confident to ash gray in seconds. "What's the kid talking about?" He forced a laugh that fooled nobody. Everyone knows kids make up stories when they're upset. The boy's confused. "I'm not confused," Colin said, stepping into the aisle. His mother reached for him, but he moved away from her grasp. "Tommy made me promise. He said if something bad happened to him, I had to tell the truth about Uncle Mike. He said nobody would believe him because he was just a kid, but maybe they'd believe me at his funeral." The funeral home went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's phone vibrating in their purse, the small American flag outside flapping against its pole. My mother Gloria shot up from her seat, her face flushed with indignation. "This is absolutely inappropriate. Michael visited his nephew out of love and concern. This child is obviously traumatized and making things up." Colin reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, his mother's old iPhone she'd given him for emergencies. "Tommy told me to record it. He said Uncle Mike would come to the hospital when Mrs. Nadine wasn't there, when she had to work or go home to shower. He said Uncle Mike would tell the nurses he was taking Tommy for walks to the playground or the game room, but they never went there." "Where did they go?" I heard myself ask, my voice sounding strange and distant, like it belonged to someone else. "To Uncle Mike's car in the parking garage. Tommy said Uncle Mike would lock the doors and tell him things, mean things, scary things." Colin's voice wavered, but he kept going. He said Uncle Mike told him that Mrs. Nadine was a bad mom, and that's why God gave Tommy cancer. He said if Tommy really loved his mom, he would stop fighting and just die already, so she could collect the life insurance money and start over with a better kid who had a dad. The funeral home erupted. People gasped. Some started gathering their things to leave. Others pulled their children closer. But Colin stood there, 8 years old and trembling, holding that phone like it was a shield, ready to play the evidence that would shatter our family forever. That morning started like every morning since Tommy died 5 days ago. I woke up at 3 a.m. in his bed, surrounded by his stuffed animals and the faint smell of the watermelon shampoo he loved. The house felt wrong without the sounds of his oxygen machine, without the soft beeping of his medication timer, without his voice calling out, "Mommy, can you lay with me?" In the middle of the night, I forced myself to get up and shower. The black dress I'd bought hung on the bathroom door, still with its tags on. I'd never thought about what a mother wears to bury her 7-year-old son. Tommy would have hated it. He always said I looked prettiest in my yellow sundress, the one I wore to his last birthday party at the hospital where we convinced the nurses to let us have real cake instead of sugar-free. My father Dennis was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He'd been staying with us for the last month of Tommy's treatment, sleeping on our uncomfortable couch without a single complaint. He looked older than his 60 years that morning, his shoulders bent with a grief that matched mine. "I made coffee," he said quietly, sliding a mug across the counter, "and I called the funeral home. Everything's ready." Dennis had been our rock through everything. When Tommy's father walked out 5 years ago, claiming he wasn't ready for a sick kid, Dennis stepped in. He learned every medication name, every treatment protocol, every superhero Tommy loved. While my mother, Gloria, criticized my parenting choices and Mike lectured me about financial responsibility, Dennis would sit for hours playing cards with Tommy during chemo, making up stories about brave knights who were bald like Tommy, turning every hospital visit into an adventure. "Is Mike coming?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your mother says the whole family will be there." Dennis's jaw tightened. I tried to talk to her about keeping things simple, respectful, but you know how she is when Mike gets involved. I knew exactly how she was. Mike had been the golden child since birth. First son, Harvard graduate, successful real estate mogul with a trophy wife and a house that had been featured in architectural magazines. He could do no wrong in Gloria's eyes. Even when he'd told me that Tommy's cancer was probably caused by my lifestyle choices as a single mother, she'd defended him, saying he was just concerned about family reputation. My sister Vera was no better. She'd been trying to have children with her husband Roger for 8 years, spending thousands on fertility treatments. When I got pregnant with Tommy at 25, unmarried and still in graduate school, she'd never forgiven me. Every family gathering became a passive-aggressive battlefield. "Must be nice," she'd say, watching Tommy play, "getting pregnant so easily when you weren't even trying." The doorbell rang at 8. Colin stood there with his mother, Patricia, both of them dressed somberly. Colin clutched a small action figure in his hand, a Batman that he and Tommy had traded back and forth since they met in kindergarten. They'd become instant best friends, bonded over superheroes and a shared love of dinosaurs. Even when Tommy got sick and missed months of school, Colin would visit every weekend, bringing homework and stories from their class. "Mrs. Nadine," Colin said, his voice small but determined, "I brought this for Tommy. We had a deal that whoever had Batman got to make one wish. It's Tommy's turn to have him." Patricia hugged me gently. "Colin has something he needs to tell you, but he insisted it wait until the service. He says Tommy made him promise something. I tried to get it out of him, but he won't budge." I knelt down to Colin's level. His eyes were red-rimmed but fierce with a purpose I didn't understand yet. "Whatever Tommy asked you to do, honey, you don't have to if it's too hard." "I promised," Colin said simply. Tommy said promises to friends are sacred, especially last promises. The funeral home parking lot was already filling when we arrived. I saw the usual divided camps of my family. Mike's BMW parked prominently near the entrance. Gloria and Vera's cars clustered nearby. Then the others. Tommy's teachers, his nurses from the pediatric oncology ward, parents of other children we'd met during treatment, Dennis's friends from his veterans group who'd adopted Tommy as an honorary grandson. The funeral director, Mr. Morrison, met us at the door. "Everything is arranged as requested," he said softly. "Tommy looks peaceful. The superhero pins you brought are on his lapel just as you asked." I walked into that room full of flowers and sympathy cards, not knowing that in less than an hour, the carefully maintained facade of our family would shatter completely, and an 8-year-old boy would expose the evil that had been hiding behind expensive suits and family loyalty. The service started beautifully, exactly how Tommy would have wanted it. Pastor Williams spoke about Tommy's incredible courage, how he'd insisted on wearing his Superman cape to chemo sessions to give strength to the younger kids. He told the story of Tommy donating his entire piggy bank, $43.17, to buy toys for the children who didn't have visitors at the hospital. Several people wiped away tears, and I felt a moment of peace knowing Tommy's kindness was being remembered. Then came the open eulogy portion, where family and friends could share memories. I should have known Mike would seize the opportunity to make it about himself. He stood up first, straightening his $1,000 suit and clearing his throat the way he did before important business presentations. Tommy was indeed a special boy, he began, using his professional voice, the one that had sold millions in real estate. But I think we need to be honest about the reality of situations like this. Sometimes God takes children early for a reason. Given our family's history of struggles, the broken homes, the poor choices, maybe this is God's way of ending bad bloodlines. The words hung in the air like poison. I heard sharp intakes of breath from Tommy's teachers. Mrs. Henderson, who'd tutored Tommy for free when he fell behind, actually stood up to leave before her husband pulled her back down. But what destroyed me was watching my relatives respond with approval. Aunt Ruth nodded sagely. My cousin Derek muttered, "harsh but true," to his wife. Uncle Carl, my mother's brother, actually said amen, like Mike had just delivered a sermon instead of calling my dead son a genetic dead end. Gloria dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, reaching out to squeeze Mike's hand as he returned to his seat. "So brave of you to say what everyone's thinking," she whispered, loud enough for our entire row to hear. Before I could find my voice, before Dennis could act on the fury I saw building in his face, Vera stood up. She walked to the podium with the confidence of someone who'd been rehearsing their words, smoothing down her designer dress that probably cost more than Tommy's monthly medications. "What Mike said might sound harsh to some," she began, her voice dripping with false compassion. "But there's truth in difficult words. Some kids are better off not growing up in broken homes without fathers, watching their mothers struggle, knowing they're a burden. Tommy suffered so much these last 2 years. Not just the cancer, but the circumstances, the constant financial stress, the absence of a male role model, the chaos of a single-parent household." She paused, looking directly at me with something that might have been pity or contempt. "Maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise for Nadine, too. Now she can start fresh. Find a husband first this time. Have a proper family. Do things in the right order. God's order." My hands were shaking so violently I had to clasp them together. Tommy had been my entire world, my reason for fighting, for working 2 jobs, for learning every medical term and treatment option. And here was my sister, at his funeral, calling his death a convenient reset button for my life. "That's enough," Dennis started to say, beginning to rise from his seat, but Gloria pulled him back down. "Let people speak their truth, Dennis," she hissed. "Not everyone has to pretend this wasn't a difficult situation." That's when Colin stood up. He was sitting 3 rows back with his mother, and when he rose, his little body trembling in his borrowed black suit, the entire room turned to look. Should I tell everyone what Uncle Mike did to Tommy before he died? The question cut through the room like a blade. Mike's confident expression crumbled instantly, his face draining of color so fast I thought he might faint. "What's the kid talking about?" He forced out a laugh that sounded more like a choke. Everyone knows children make up stories when they're grieving. The boy's obviously confused, overwhelmed by the loss of his friend. "I'm not confused," Colin said, stepping into the aisle despite his mother's attempt to pull him back. "Tommy made me promise. He said if something bad happened to him, if he didn't make it, I had to tell everyone the truth about Uncle Mike." "This is ridiculous," Gloria snapped, standing up abruptly. "Michael visited his dying nephew out of love and concern. This child is obviously traumatized and creating fantasies. Someone remove him." But Colin stood firm, his 8-year-old frame shaking but determined. Tommy said nobody would believe him because he was just a sick kid, but he said maybe they'd believe me at his funeral when I told them about the recordings. The word recordings made Mike stumble backward into his pew, and suddenly, everything about Tommy's last month made terrible, horrifying sense. My blood turned to ice as I watched Mike's face cycle through panic, anger, and forced composure. Colin stood in that aisle like a tiny warrior, clutching his mother's old iPhone in one hand and the Batman action figure in the other. The entire funeral home held its breath, waiting for what would come next. "Colin," I said, standing up slowly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm building inside me. "What did Tommy tell you about Uncle Mike?" Patricia, Colin's mother, tried to intervene. "Maybe this isn't the right time or place for this conversation. We should speak privately after the service." "No," Colin said firmly, with more authority than any 8-year-old should possess. "Tommy said it had to be here, in front of everyone, so they couldn't pretend it didn't happen. He said Uncle Mike was too good at making people believe lies in private." Gloria stood up, her face flushed with indignation. "This is absolutely inappropriate. How dare you let your child disrupt my grandson's funeral with these fantasies? Michael has been nothing but supportive during Tommy's illness." "Supportive?" Dennis finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that what you call showing up at the hospital only when Nadine wasn't there?" Mike tried to regain control. "I visited when I could. My schedule is demanding. Nadine knows that. I came when she needed to rest or handle other responsibilities. I was helping." Colin shook his head. "That's not true. Tommy kept a notebook. He wrote down every time you came. You always called the nurses' station first to make sure Mrs. Nadine was gone. You told them you were taking Tommy for walks to help his circulation, to the playground or the game room. But you never took him there." "Where did they go?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would shatter something inside me forever. "To Uncle Mike's car in the parking garage," Colin said. "Tommy said Uncle Mike would lock the doors and make him listen to things, mean things. He said Uncle Mike told him that Mrs. Nadine was a bad mom, and that's why God gave Tommy cancer as punishment. He said Tommy was being selfish by fighting to stay alive because the treatments were too expensive, and Mrs. Nadine would lose her house." Gasps echoed through the funeral home. Parents started ushering their children outside. Some of Mike's business associates began edging toward the exits, clearly not wanting to be associated with whatever was unfolding. "The boy is lying," Mike said, but his voice cracked. "This is grief talking. Children don't understand adult conversations about practical matters." Colin lifted the phone. "Tommy asked me to record you. He said nobody believes kids, but they can't argue with proof." He looked at me with those earnest eyes. "He was protecting you, Mrs. Nadine. He didn't want you to know how mean Uncle Mike was because you already had so much to worry about." "Play it," I said. Gloria tried to stop him. "This is a funeral, not a courthouse. Have some respect for the dead." "Tommy is dead," I shouted, surprising myself with the force of my voice. "My baby is dead, and if he wanted this truth told at his funeral, then by God, we're going to hear it. Play it, Colin." Colin pressed play. The first thing we heard was Tommy's labored breathing, the wheeze that had become so familiar in his final weeks. Then Mike's voice, clear and cold. "You need to understand something. Tommy, your mother can't afford these treatments. She's already taken out 3 loans. The house is going to be foreclosed. You're 7 years old enough to understand that sometimes loving someone means letting them go." Tommy's small voice responded, "Mom says we're fighters. She says as long as we're together, we can handle anything." Mike's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Your mom lies to you because she's too weak to face reality. The doctors already know you're not going to make it." I heard them talking. "You have maybe a month. Every day you hang on is another day of debt, another day of watching your mother destroy her life for a lost cause." "I'm not a lost cause," Tommy protested weakly. "Yes, you are. Your father knew it. That's why he left. He saw what was coming and got out while he could. Smart man. Your mother should have done the same, given you up for adoption when the diagnosis came. But she's too proud, too stupid to admit she can't handle this." The recording continued, but I couldn't stand still anymore. I walked toward Mike, each step deliberate, my eyes locked on his. "You tortured my dying son. You went to the hospital to psychologically torture a 7-year-old child fighting cancer." Mike backed away, bumping into people as he moved. "I was being realistic. Someone had to prepare him for the inevitable. You were filling his head with false hope." The rage that had been building inside me for 5 days, maybe for years, finally found its voice. "There's more," Colin said, his small voice cutting through the chaos that had erupted after the first recording. He swiped to another file on the phone. "This one is from last week, 3 days before Tommy died." The funeral home fell silent again. Even those who had been heading for the exit stopped, drawn by the horrible magnetism of unfolding tragedy. Colin pressed play, and Mike's voice filled the room again, but this time it was even more vicious, more calculated. "Listen to me, Tommy. Your mother is at the meeting with the social worker right now, begging for more financial assistance. She's humiliating herself and our entire family. Do you know what people say about us at the country club? They call us the family with the welfare case. That's you, Tommy. You're the welfare case." Tommy's voice was barely a whisper, so weak I had to cover my mouth to stifle a sob. "Please stop, Uncle Mike. I want to go back to my room. Not until you understand what you're doing to everyone. Your grandmother Gloria cries every night, not because you're sick, but because she knows you're destroying your mother's future. Who's going to want to marry a woman with hundreds of thousands in medical debt? Who's going to give her a job when she's missed so much work? You're 7 years old, Tommy, old enough to make the right choice." "What choice?" Tommy asked. "Stop taking the medicines. Stop fighting. The doctors say you're suffering. Why make everyone else suffer too? If you really loved your mother, you'd let go. She could use your life insurance money to start over. Maybe have a healthy child with a real father this time, not another bastard who'll probably end up sick too." The recording captured the sound of Tommy crying, then the sudden commotion of nurses entering the room, asking what was wrong, Mike making excuses about emotional farewells, and then silence. I stood frozen as Colin put the phone down. The last thing Tommy told me was that Uncle Mike was wrong. He said his mom loved him more than all the stars in the sky, and that's why he had to keep fighting. But he also said if he couldn't fight anymore, someone needed to stop Uncle Mike from hurting other kids. The dam finally broke. I lunged at Mike with every ounce of strength my grief-exhausted body could muster. My hand connected with his face in a slap that echoed through the funeral home like a gunshot. "You monster! You told my baby to die. You went to a dying child and told him to give up." Mike stumbled backward, holding his face. "You assaulted me. Everyone saw that. I'll press charges. I'll sue you for everything." "Sue me for what?" I screamed. "The medical debt? The house that's already in foreclosure? The car I sold to pay for Tommy's last treatment? You already took everything when you convinced my son he was better off dead." Gloria rushed to Mike's defense. "He was being practical. Someone had to prepare the boy for reality. You filled Tommy's head with fantasies about beating cancer when the doctors said there was only a 10% chance. 10%. I whirled on my mother. 10% was still a chance. Children have beaten worse odds. But how could he fight when his own uncle was visiting him to tell him to give up? Dennis stepped forward, his voice booming with military authority. "Enough! Gloria, you enabled this monster. You knew what he was doing, didn't you? You knew why he was visiting Tommy alone." Gloria's silence was damning. "You knew," Dennis continued, his voice breaking. "You knew your son was tormenting a dying child, and you let it happen because you agreed with him. You thought Tommy was better off dead too." Vera tried to interject. "Dad, that's not fair. We all knew the situation was hopeless. Mike was just trying to spare everyone more pain. By telling a 7-year-old he was a worthless burden?" Patricia, Colin's mother, spoke up for the first time, her voice shaking with rage. "What kind of family are you people?" The funeral director, Mr. Morrison, finally intervened. "I'm going to have to ask everyone to calm down or leave. This is still a funeral service." "Yes, it is," Dennis said firmly. "It's my grandson's funeral, and everyone who thinks his death was a blessing, everyone who nodded along when Mike called him a mistake, everyone who believes a sick child is better off dead than loved and fighting, get out now." The room erupted in movement. Mike stormed out, Gloria and Vera following him, along with at least 15 other relatives. Mike shouted over his shoulder about lawsuits and defamation, about custody of future children, about destroying my life completely. Colin walked to Tommy's casket and gently placed the Batman action figure inside, next to Tommy's small hands. "I kept my promise, Tommy. Just like you asked, the bad man can't hurt anyone else now." The funeral home felt peaceful after Mike and his supporters left. Only about 30 people remained, but they were the ones who truly loved Tommy. His favorite nurse, Sandra, stood up and shared how Tommy would sneak candy to other kids on the ward when the nurses weren't looking. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, read a story Tommy had written about a superhero whose power was making sick kids laugh. Colin's mother, Patricia, organized an impromptu gathering at her house afterward, where people shared real memories of Tommy, not poisoned eulogies about convenient deaths. That evening, I sat in Tommy's room, still unable to process everything that had happened. Dennis knocked and came in carrying a cardboard box that looked like it had been hidden away for months. "I need to show you something," he said, sitting on Tommy's race car bed. "I've been documenting everything since I suspected something was wrong." He pulled out a tablet and showed me file after file of recordings. "I installed a small camera in Tommy's hospital room 3 months ago. Gloria doesn't know. I thought Mike was saying inappropriate things about the medical bills, but I never imagined it was this bad." I watched one video with the timestamp from 6 weeks ago. Mike was telling Tommy that his illness was punishment for being born out of wedlock, that God doesn't love children whose parents weren't married. Tommy was crying, saying he was sorry for being bad, promising to be better if God would just make the pain stop. I had to run to the bathroom to vomit. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked when I could speak again. Dennis's eyes filled with tears. "I was building a case. I wanted to get a restraining order, but I needed more evidence. I thought we had time. I thought Tommy would beat this and then we'd deal with Mike. I failed you both by waiting." We spent the next 3 days with lawyers. The recordings were more than enough for a criminal case. Mike was charged with child abuse and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The story hit local news, then national. Real estate mogul charged with psychological torture of dying nephew became a headline that destroyed Mike's carefully built reputation. He lost his real estate license within a month. His wife filed for divorce within 2. Gloria and Vera chose to stand by Mike, claiming the recordings were taken out of context, that we were destroying the family over misunderstandings. They cut Dennis and me out of their lives completely, which felt more like a blessing than a punishment. Dennis officially divorced Gloria after 40 years of marriage, saying he couldn't spend another day with someone who would excuse the torture of a child. But from that darkness came unexpected light. The hospital where Tommy was treated created the Tommy Protocol, a new system for monitoring and restricting visitor access for vulnerable pediatric patients. No adult could visit a child patient alone without parental consent, and all visits had to be logged. Colin's family became our chosen family. Patricia and her husband included me in every holiday, every celebration, making sure I never felt alone. 6 months after the funeral, while packing Tommy's things for donation, I found a letter hidden inside his favorite Captain America book. My hands shook as I read his careful handwriting. "Dear Mommy, if you are reading this, I am probably in heaven with the angels. Uncle Mike keeps telling me I should die, but I know he is wrong. You told me I am brave and strong and loved. Uncle Mike says mean things, but you say true things. I told Colin about Uncle Mike because I don't want him to hurt other kids who are sick. Colin promised to tell everyone if I go to heaven. Please don't be sad forever, Mommy. You are the best mom in the whole universe. Remember when we made pancakes that looked like dinosaurs and you let me eat them for dinner? That was the best day. Remember when you slept in the hospital chair for 20 days when I was really sick? You never left me. Uncle Mike is wrong about everything. You loved me perfect. I hope you get a new house without the bad memories. I hope you find someone who loves you like you loved me. I hope you have more kids and tell them about their brave brother Tommy. Don't let Uncle Mike near them. I love you to the moon and back and around all the stars and planets twice. Forever your brave boy, Tommy P.S. Tell Colin he can keep Batman after all. Superheroes should stick together. The letter broke me and healed me simultaneously. My 7-year-old son had spent his final weeks protecting me while fighting for his life, making contingency plans with his 8-year-old best friend to expose a predator. He had more courage and wisdom than adults 3 times his age. Tommy taught me that family isn't about blood or DNA or surnames. It's about who shows up with love instead of judgment, who brings comfort instead of cruelty, who fights beside you instead of against you. The funeral meant to bury my son ended up burying the lies our family had lived with for decades. If you've made it this far in our story, you probably understand that sometimes the most toxic people in our lives share our DNA. Don't let anyone, especially family, dim your light or your child's light with their darkness. Tommy's bravery in documenting his uncle's abuse saved other children from similar torture. His story changed hospital policies and opened conversations about family abuse that desperately needed to happen. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to cut toxic family members out of your life, that protecting your children is more important than keeping peace, and that sometimes the smallest voices reveal the biggest truths. Comment below if you've had to make similar difficult choices with family members. Your story might help someone else find the courage to protect their own children. And please subscribe to this channel where we share real stories of survival, hope, and the courage to stand up against those who would harm the innocent, even when those people are supposed to love and protect us. Tommy's legacy lives on in every child protected by the Tommy Protocol, in every parent who finds the strength to say no more to family abuse, and in the knowledge that even a 7-year-old boy can change the world by refusing to let evil win.